Hello, welcome or welcome back to Life on the Fringe. Today is Free Speech Friday. So every Friday we talk about free speech news of the week, and on Fridays. The rest of the week we usually talk about lighter topics like thrifting or sometimes hamster rights advocacy or mental health, the last two not really being that light, but anyhow, on Fridays we talk about free speech. And there are two really interesting cases that came out this week about free speech. There's a third that we're going to talk about briefly, but the main two involve public school students and race. And in fact, they all involve public school students and race, but the first two are K-12, and the third case is for college students, public college students. So in the first case, happens in Connecticut, takes place in Connecticut. A student was arrested for using a racial slur in a Snapchat story with a picture of a fellow student in that school. So obviously the statement made by the student was deplorable. If you aren't familiar with social media, stories are things that are up for 24 hours, and they go out to every person that you are friends with on that platform, unless you specifically exclude them. In this case, a Black student was photographed, then there was the caption. It's unclear what the caption specifically said. I couldn't find it in the news articles that I have linked in the chat, and we'll be linking when this goes up on my channel in the description as well. But regardless, using racial slurs is just not okay, especially like towards another student to hurt their feelings. I mean, it's always bad, but especially in this case, very bad. But what's interesting is that they were both arrested and then held accountable by the school. So you have two different arms of the state, the police and the school, disciplining the students' speech. In the second case we're going to be talking about takes place in Oklahoma. Two students were disciplined for wearing Black Lives Matter T-shirts at school. So these two students were both Black. A third student that same day from the same family who's also Black wore a Black Lives Matter shirt. But because that student was slightly older, they were in a different school within the same district, and that school did not punish that student for wearing the shirt. This is going to be important later for the arguments about whether that action was constitutional or not. And the third case that we're going to briefly talk about takes place at a public university where two college students were conversing with each other about something, and they used racial slurs as they were walking to their cars from class. I'm going to be talking about this case the least because it's the least related to them, but I did want to mention it because it obviously still involves public students. It still obviously involves race. The disciplinary actions taken against those students was that they were forced to choose between having it go on their permanent record for their degree or to attend a racial training class. Excuse me, my dog just came into my room. Hi, buddy. So I did want to mention it. So let's go back to Connecticut. As I said, it's an interesting case because two branches of the government decided this speech was not protected. in general, to arrest someone for speech is requires a much higher degree of severity than punishing a student just at school. And the reason that this speech qualified as being unprotected is due to a 1912 law in Connecticut um, that prevents the ridicule of any person for race, sex, or religion. So the law has been on the books for quite some time, but it is controversial. It's not gone its lifespan without being debated as if that law is even constitutional. In fact, the bill itself went up for debate to be, taken down just before coronavirus hit. So when Connecticut's congressional session ended early, they weren't actually able to vote on whether or not they wanted to keep this bill or not, keep this law or not. So it was debated as recently as the beginning of the pandemic. So obviously still very controversial. So then anything that uses that law is inherently then controversial because it's applying a law that is debated enough that it might get taken down. That said, 40 times this law was used to make an arrest in the past 12 months. So it isn't something that's completely rare. But if you compare it to other laws, 40 times in 12 months is not that many times for an entire state. If you think about something like even as horrific as murder, there are usually more than 40 murder trials per year in a state. So it's just bizarre. It's a bizarre law. Police themselves said it's unusual for them to arrest students for speech, whatever the speech is. School officials have also said it's unusual. Law professors as well. It's a very unique case. And I say case, but it's not currently like going to court, although it very well could, because if they decide to prosecute the student, it obviously will. Now, I said the school said they were holding the kid accountable. The school actually hasn't released what they have done to hold the student accountable for their snap, citing student privacy as the reason they haven't released their discipline to the public at large. However, the parent of the bullied student said that she was told by school officials that the offending student had been expelled from school. I don't know whether or not that's true. No one does because the school isn't going to confirm it at this time. So either we will find out or we won't. If it goes to court, I'm sure we will. But currently it's unclear. Regardless, the school did say that they were holding the student accountable, so it begs the question whether or not schools are able to hold students accountable for this type of speech when it happens online. And I think that's a critical component of this case because right now the Supreme Court is debating a case involving a cheerleader who used the F word 4 times in a Snap story and was kicked off of their cheerleading team for a year. The court is debating whether or not schools have the right to punish student speech that happens online. Obviously, that is a very different scenario than a targeted racial slur towards a specific student. I'm not saying they're the same, but the Supreme Court... Hi, buddy. This is my dog, buddy. Do you want to go outside? Here. Okay. Buddy hype. I'll tell him you say hi. So whether or not they can say what they decide on this case will determine whether they have any right at all to monitor online speech, and then probably the limitations of what they can and can't monitor online. So this is a very hot topic because of the online component of this. But obviously, one is almost harassment and the other isn't. And I say almost harassment because harassment in its legal definition has to happen towards a specific person, which this did happen to, and multiple times. And what's missing, according to the police and the legal scholars, for it to be qualified as harassment is the multiple times component. So the police could not arrest the student out of harassment. They had to invoke the 1912 law rather than more recent, like, harassment type laws and limitations on speech. They had to use the 1912 law, and the school has to use, like, rules against bullying in order to punish this speech, and then apply that to online speech. So there's a lot of components to this case, and I would love to hear your thoughts either in the chat or in the comments down below about what you think about this case. But for now, I'm going to move to Oklahoma. So in Oklahoma, 2 students were punished for wearing Black Lives Matter T-shirts to school. They were forced to sit in the principal's office / front office of the school all day until they either chose to change shirts, either a free shirt provided by the school or their mom could bring them a shirt, or sit there all day. Change or sit there all day, basically, were the options. And the students chose not to change, and they chose to sit in the front office rather than take off their shirt or change their shirt. One student was asked to turn their shirt, or told rather, to turn their shirt inside out. The student did turn their shirt inside out, but both students did sit in the front office. One student missed, like, recess and wasn't able to, like, eat lunch in the cafeteria. They missed an entire day of school, basically, for wearing this shirt. What basically amounts to an in-school suspension. It's just not being called that because they don't usually have ISS in such young grades. One of the students, I believe, is 10 years old. These are, like, young students being punished for their shirts. So why were they punished? Well, the schools said originally that they did not allow any political speech at all within the school, basically erecting a wall between politics and schools. Now, constitutionally, that is not a thing. The comparison case, Supreme Court case for this incident is Tinker, which involved an armband or another article of clothing protesting the Vietnam War during the Vietnam War. So at the height of these, like, protests and riots for Vietnam, like against Vietnam War, the students wore these black armbands. Here, after a summer of protests, students wore Black Lives Matter shirts. So the comparison is actually quite parallel. There are not that many differences between the two cases. So from a legal perspective, the school is not in the right according to current case law for the Supreme Court. That doesn't mean that you couldn't make the case that it shouldn't be that way, but currently the way that the law is interpreted by the Supreme Court, these students do have the right to wear their shirts to school, so long as the school does not anticipate a substantial material disruption. Now, maybe you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, maybe in this school district, wearing that shirt would cause such a political outroar by students, either like for the shirts or against the shirts or what have you. We actually know, because of this third student, that in this district that wouldn't happen, because it didn't happen. Their older sibling wore a Black Lives Matter shirt to school and was not punished by the school that they attended within that district. And nothing happened. At least, like, nothing I can find in the news suggested that there was any sort of like material and substantial disruption to the school day because this student wore this shirt. So unless we have a reason to believe that one school would be different from another school within the same district, which is very unlikely, there is no reason the school should have anticipated material or substantial disruption. So preventing the students from wearing the shirt just infringed on their free speech rights, basically for no reason, or because they believed that any type of political speech would cause that kind of a disruption. But unfortunately, you can't make that claim, or not unfortunately, but unfortunately for the school, you can't actually make that generalized claim and such a generalized rule that prohibits political speech in schools due to Tinker. In that case, again, you had a very current, very hot topic, very contentious debate happening around the Vietnam War. Students voiced their opinions silently through clothing, and the Supreme Court came out and defended the students and went on to say, not only do students not shed their constitutional free speech rights at the door, they do support, not only do they not shed them, schools should be treated as the marketplace of ideas, and to not have these types of discussions at schools would be counterproductive to the goal of schools themselves. That court case opinion basically argues that part of the schooling process, part of what you get out of a public education, is the exchange of ideas with other students about current issues and practice in discussing those issues. So to not be allowed to bring politics into school at all, as this school is suggesting you shouldn't, is counterproductive to the goals of schools to prepare students for citizenship. So again, you have this Connecticut speech case where you have basically a Supreme Court case going up right now that is, unclear how it's going to turn out. So we don't have a lot of clarity right now about the constitutionality defined by the Supreme Court of the actions taken by the school. We also have a law being enforced that might be taken down anyway in the future, or was in the process of being taken down potentially, that also has been debated the constitutionality of that law has been debated amongst free speech and civil rights scholars for a while. So a pretty complex case, but all around the area of race. And here you have a case where there is a very specific Supreme Court case that touches at the heart of these issues, where the school is clearly violating current Supreme Court rulings. But they're both on the topic of race. And I think that's what's really interesting about this week, is that all three cases have to do with race. And all three of them are coming at it from different facets of the free speech argument debate as a whole. You have the issue of online versus in-person speech, school speech. You have the idea of K-12 versus college. you have the idea of offensive, like hate speech versus just political speech. Where do you draw the line on that? You also have the issue of, you know, like different ideological views being represented. Like in these free speech cases, it's not like all of these were like racial slur cases, or all of them were like Black Lives Matter cases. Like, it was just a very interesting week, in that there was one like commonality holding together otherwise very, very different cases concerning free speech and education. And I would love to hear your thoughts about like which differences matter and why, or which differences don't matter and why, when deciding your opinions on how these cases should have been handled. Did schools make the right call? Did they not? How should we be interpreting free speech in the future? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Personally, for me, like I said, not only do I think that constitutionally the T-shirts are protected speech, that's more or less a fact of the present, but I agree with it. I think it is protected speech. I think with the other two cases, I would want to know more. Hopefully, we'll be getting more information about the college students. As it stands right now, in a conversation between two students, and there wasn't harassment, and it was college students, it seems strange for colleges to be punishing speech, but I would like to hear more about what happened. The article I read wasn't very specific at all. I think with the case of the online speech and racial slur, I'm torn, because I don't think schools really should be able to monitor online speech, for the reason of, if they can, are they going to be punishing students like the cheerleader who swear online? Because you're not allowed to swear in school, so should you not be allowed to swear online if you're a public school student? Like, should your school be able to monitor that too? Should they only be able to monitor bullying? What if you swear at someone or about someone? Not racial slurs, but other things. Like, it's just interesting. Or you complain about a teacher. I don't know. And then on the other hand, you have this idea of bullying and harassment, in the sense, and like hate speech. So that case to me is just fascinating, because it's really challenging me to weigh out like online speech, hate speech issues. What happens when there's speech that's like, deplorable, but you can't do anything about it. Like, I don't think the student should be arrested. It's not harassment. If it happened again, they should, and it is harassment. At least according to police, if this counts as harassment by the police, they should have just used that charge. No, BLM stands for Black Lives Matter. Sorry for the confusion. So, yeah, so it typically is worn by people who support police brutality reform, or police reform, and are against police brutality. People who maybe believe in having more like social workers involved in cases, or with schools in particular, typically something that's supported by Black Lives Matter supporters, is having more counselors in schools than police officers. So that's what Black Lives Matter typically represents. These students didn't say specifically like any policies in particular that they wanted, but in the case of Tinker, they didn't either, except for like the notion of like ending the war. It wasn't like when to end the war, how to end the war. It was we shouldn't. It also could have been perceived as anti-draft or maybe only anti-draft. But the students said they did want to advocate for the ending of the war, and they were opposed to the draft in the Tinker case. So it is interesting. So those are the main cases for this week. Again, I've linked the 2 articles concerning the 2 main cases in the chat. I'll be putting them in the description. In the description, I'll also link the 3rd case I've been talking about briefly with the college students. And as I find out more information, I will put them in the comments as well. If you have any articles you would like me to check out about these cases, please put them in the comments, or anything you'd like me to read. There are other free speech cases that have happened this week. You can put those in the comments down below. And then maybe I'll talk about them next week. But overall, let me know what you think. And I hope you have I suppose that's supposed to be believe. How does this feel? I don't know if you're calling me a brainwashed millennial or not, but I don't think I am. I think both cases have very interesting points that are more nuanced than one could have if you were brainwashed. Typically, people would either be for both cases or against. And I am undecided on one, so I feel like to be brainwashed, you would need to already have an opinion given to you rather than developing an opinion on these cases, as I've been doing in this conversation. But regardless, so yeah, Black Lives Matter T-shirts. You have students punished for wearing those. You have students punished for having bully a student with a racial slur on their Snap story, and you have 2 college students using racial slurs as they walk to their car. So, like I said, I'm still following the current Supreme Court case on the cheerleader and their Snap story, saying like F school, F cheerleading, F soccer, F everything. That might not be the right order, but that's the gist of what they said. I don't think that that's something schools should be punishing, but we'll see what the Supreme Court says, and then that will give insight as to how far schools can monitor things like online speech and online bullying in the future. Yeah, and thanks to everyone for participating in the chat. And I would agree with the final comment in the sense that I don't think that name calling is necessarily productive discussion. So hopefully in the future we'll be able to have more productive discussion about the actual issues than about people as a whole. But regardless, use your rights as you will. And I will see you next time. Have a good day. Bye.